Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me. I want to talk today about our changing world. The fact that today, or yesterday, depending on wherever you listen to this, if you're watching this in a more immediate sense, today the Liberal Party in Canada came through with a victory. Now, we need to acknowledge that that victory primarily is due to the insertion that Donald Trump has placed on the Canadian electorate. And the reason for that is that Donald Trump's a clown, and that as a result of his clownness, the Canadians have decided that they would prefer to have a party that was on the nose at the tune of minus 25 points a month or so ago to someone who is prepared to stand up to Donald Trump. So it now appears that if you are prepared to make a stand against Trumpism, if you are prepared to think, well, perhaps we don't want an autocracy sitting on our border, or perhaps, as an Australian instance, we don't want an ally who is so anti-democratic that they are deemed totally unreliable, which is the case now with the United States. And there are countries that are making a stand. Canada would be one of the first of those, and probably the most significant given that they're on the border of the US. So, and Australia clearly needs to make a similar decision about how we view the United States, because we we want to have a relationship with them because we're so indebted to them in so many ways, which is our fault, but which has also been stimulated by the United States' insistence that they provide military forces for us and that they have control over the Pacific so they can keep that terrible Chinese people away from influencing whatever happens in the Pacific region. Plus also, it's about trade. Well, so much for that. It's stuffed. China have decided not to trade with the US anyway at this particular point, and could probably ride through the chaos that has been created by the one and only great Donald Trump. So I want to take us to a number of news items to talk about this. So I'm going to talk firstly about the Carney one, and then and the Canadian election. Then I'll talk about Ukraine, and then I've got a small article on Trump's second term and what all that means up until this date, given that it's up to 100 days now. Seems like forever, admittedly, but it's 100 days. And then I've just got a brief piece on the election here in Australia, which takes place on Saturday. So to start this off, this particular piece here, which is, I just wanted to quote a little bit about what Mark Carney said. He declares victory in Canada election. It's fourth term for Liberals, which is a bit unheard of, but they were able to do that. Prime Minister Mark Carney has declared victory. In a victory speech, Mr Carney stressed the importance of Canadian unity in the face of threats coming from Washington. And I think we'll probably find that this is becoming a trendy piece around the world, whereby even here in Australia, where our leaders at this particular point haven't made any statements that are anti-Trump, seem to be treading very carefully in terms of the language they choose to use, given our alliance with the United States and the control they have over the military in our region. As I've been warning for months, America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country, he told cheering supporters at a rally in Ottawa. That will never ever happen. But we also must recognise the reality that our world has fundamentally changed. And I guess that's my emphasis in today's podcast, is the world has changed. And are we prepared to adapt to this changing world? And I think to some extent we need to celebrate the fact that Donald Trump's done us all a favour. He's helped us to realise that the United States control over the world, the way they've inserted, not the way they have inserted themselves in the geopolitical structures around the world, and tariffs and not tariffs but trade and a whole host of other areas, soft power, aid to certain countries and so on, has been quite influential. Now, it's not to take anything away from the United States in terms of their ability to be able to develop vaccines, to assist in a whole lot of health areas, dealing with situations even around Parkinson and Alzheimer's. The United States have been doing a great deal of research in those particular areas, relieving poverty in certain countries. They've done all of that, and I guess my point is, I wonder whether there's an altruistic reason for that, or whether it's simply because they realise that they can influence the democracies or the lack thereof in other countries, particularly in Africa, and whether for them that is a benefit in terms of maintaining their power and their control of those regions through the soft power that they've been able to present. So, open for debate as to whether that was their idea. My guess is it probably was. And Trump has now made us aware that that was their aim, and when we withdrew that, we realised the influence that they've actually had and how that's impacted those countries. And some of that influence has been important, providing even providing condoms for a place in Mozambique called Gaza, strangely enough, to help them battle HIV/AIDS. And I guess some of that is altruistic because, they dealt with, the US government dealt with Ebola when they had an outbreak in Africa. And because if that had been spread to the rest of the world, it would have been catastrophic. So they've done some good things. No one's going to dispute all that. My question is the reasons why they do it. They do it for their benefit. Do they do it for the world's benefit? Do they do it for the country's benefit? Do they do it because they have an altruistic view around how to be able to help people? I doubt whether it's the latter. So Canada have said, bugger off, and that's probably a good thing. The other thing too that I just wanted to discuss is a particular article that I came across in The Guardian, and that is Ukraine has exposed Trump's true identity as a vandal, an autocrat, a gangster and a fool. And I certainly agree with that, every single word of it, in fact. To see the true face of Donald Trump, look no further than Ukraine. Laid bare in his handling of that issue are not only his myriad weaknesses, but also the danger he poses to his country and to the wider world, to say nothing of the battled people of Ukraine itself. Don't be fooled by the mild, vaguely theatrical rebuke Trump issued to Vladimir Putin on Thursday after Moscow unleashed a deadly wave of drone strikes in Kyiv, killing 12 and injuring dozens. Vladimir, stop. And I agree with this. This is a ludicrous statement. Doesn't actually exert any power or whatever over Putin. Doesn't increase sanctions or anything. It's just a couple of words. It means bugger all. Pay attention instead to the fact that in the nearly 100 days since Trump took office, the US has essentially switched sides in the battle between Putin's Russia and democratic Ukraine, backing the invaders against the invaded. On Friday, Trump's real estate buddy and special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, held talks in Moscow with Putin. But any resemblance between the US and an honest broker is purely coincidental. On the contrary, previous encounters between the two men resulted in Witkoff parroting Kremlin talking points, essentially endorsing Russia's claim to the Ukrainian territory it seized. In that, Witkoff was merely following the lead set by his boss. The supposed peace deal Trump is now in a hurry to seal amounts to handing Putin almost everything he wants and demanding Ukraine surrender. And of course that basically is unacceptable. We can't see Ukraine being given over to Putin and to Russia, and we certainly need to be able to stand by them. And a great thing here in Australia is that we've decided that we're going to do that regardless of what the United States are doing. But it is a strong indicator of the weakness that is Donald Trump, that he said that he'd be able to stop the war in one day, and he hasn't, and probably won't, until such time as Putin is able to, decides to agree to a ceasefire. But even then, Ukraine are not too certain as to whether he will even stick by that. Up to this point, there's been 22 attempts to be able to resolve this war. All of them have failed because Putin has pulled out. That is the reality. The other issue that I want to talk about is this one, which I thought some of you might be interested in. Others won't. Many of you will probably criticise me for even raising this. But Trump's second term will be the worst presidential term ever. In his first 100 days back in office, Donald Trump has made a strong case that his second term will be by far the worst presidential term in US history. So many of his actions are mind-boggling and heart-wrenching. So many seem powered by ignorance and incoherence, by capriciousness and callousness. Ain't that the truth? With their sociopathic desire to disrupt anything and everything, the president and his top henchman, Elon Musk, seem eager to pulverise the foundations of our government, our democracy, our alliances, and our notions of truth. In just 100 days, Trump's new term has shown itself to be the most lawless and authoritarian in US history. And I think we need to come to the realisation that that is the case. That Trump is authoritarian. That Trump is changing the system and changing the rule of law, confronting the rule of law, in fact, to a point whereby there's going to come a stage where even the Republicans are going to have to make a stand against this terrible, terrible human being. And this is coming. In fact, the article goes on further to say the most dangerous part of Trump's agenda is his war against democracy and constitution, defying judges' orders, deporting people without due process, pardoning hundreds of January 6th criminals, calling to impeach judges who rule against him, suggesting he will run for a third term, using federal agencies to take vengeance against his perceived enemies, and banning books from military libraries. Underlining his contempt for the rule of law, Trump has even talked about disappearing US citizens to foreign prisons where they could be locked up forever. For anyone who cares about democracy and basic liberties, this is DEFCON 1 stuff. So true. So the world is changing. Trump's causing it to change. But to some extent, this has been on the cards for many years, for decades maybe, where there has been a decline in the US. And what interests me is that many commentators in the US always refer to their democracy as an experiment. Now, us in the Western world generally, those that are under the Westminster system, we don't see it as an experiment. We just see it as it is. It's not perfect by any means, but it's certainly better than the alternative. And it's certainly better than what the United States has developed for themselves. It's not a democracy. It's a makeshift democracy, if anything. It's make-believe, because it can be so easily disrupted and so easily destroyed, as is demonstrated by Donald Trump. Now, finally, I want to come to this particular argument, which is a bit disturbing for me, because I'm a great believer that we need to be doing far more for Indigenous people, and the stats prove that. We don't bridge the gap between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. In fact, that gap just seems to either stay the same or in some cases just seems to widen. And we need to do something about changing all of that. So Dutton has decided that what he's going to do is going to cause a division in Australia again by determining that welcome to country should no longer be offered in the way that it has in the past, that it should be limited in some way, and that as a result of that, organisations should make that decision for themselves, which is a bizarre statement to make because they do anyway. But what he's doing is placing this racist view that for some reason we should not accept the fact that we are the white people, the ancestors, if you like, those people that came in on the first fleet. They were the ones that chose to find a way to eradicate Indigenous people. And that was their intention. There's no disputing of all of that. I was reading a book which highlights some 400 odd massacres that occurred in Australia. A part of our history, in fact, but a part of our history that never gets taught because it's shameful to think that that is who we were or how we started this particular country. And the result of all of that still, in fact, affects and impedes Indigenous Australians to this very day. And in order to be able to fill this gap that occurs between Indigenous, non-Indigenous people in many, many areas, we need to find a way to be able to manage all of that, to deal with it. And to do that, we need to understand it. But Dutton keeps on insisting that we must divide the nation accordingly because he won, in his view, the referendum last year about the voice. So they shouldn't have a voice. So this is the underlying thing. We should not give Indigenous people a voice. And Welcome to Country is part of this voice, this effort to be able to give them a voice. So here, Peter Button has described Welcome to Country ceremonies before sports games as divisive in a pointing intervention into a debate of the cultural practice that has escalated since extreme right-wing agitators disrupted Anzac Day services on Friday. Now, the question really is, what is there about Dutton raising this as an issue? What is he trying to do? What is his intention here? Is it because he is racist, which is a possibility, or is it because he sees that he believes that there is a group of people, a group of electors who would like this idea about dividing us on race, that we've gone too far, that it has no meaning, that it's imposing a value and a belief on us which we don't want, simply because we ourselves have got racist views. Is that really what he's intending to do? So Dutton told Channel 7's Leaders Debate on Sunday night that Welcome to Country ceremonies were respectful at official events such as the opening of Parliament each year, but there are many other examples, including the common practice of holding them before football games, were overdone. Now, it's up to AFL and NRL or whoever to organise those themselves, which they do. But his comments represent a hardening of the coalition's position since the opposition took aim at Welcome to Country ceremonies earlier this year by pledging to wind back government spending on them. Federal departments have spent about $550,000 on ceremonies over the last 2 years. Now, I don't know whether the federal government spend any money on the AFL's Welcome to Country or NRL's or any other events, but I would imagine that the organisation that's involved with that, they're the ones that spend that money, whatever that money might be. The ceremonies have been a target of conservative criticism, but came under further attack when right-wing hecklers, including a known neo-Nazis, so why in the hell are we taking notice of what neo-Nazis are saying, disrupted them at Anzac Day services in Melbourne and Perth last week. This triggered condemnation across the political spectrum, but a Welcome to Country ceremony at a Melbourne Storm match was called off later that day, distressing Indigenous groups. Now, someone has said that, is it like we're welcoming people, into our own home, right? So, if we open the door and we say, come on in, this is our home, we welcome you here and we expect your behaviour to be appropriate and respectful of us. If not, I'll kick you out. Indigenous people don't have the opportunity, really, to welcome people into their home. This has been their home for over 60,000 years. And we, as those people that have come here, that are not born Indigenous, we are still, I believe, visitors to this home. Now, I've bought a house here, I've raised children here, I've had a business here, I've had my life here. That is fine. Acknowledging that Indigenous people were the first Australians, that this was their home, that others, a lot of us, our ancestors, chose to invade, take over, and destroy, in fact, Indigenous way of life, even though I didn't do it, even though I don't feel personal guilt around all of that, there certainly is an element of shame, of embarrassment about what we have done to Indigenous people. It is woeful and it is wrong. So there are all my takes on the news items of the day. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to my channel, ring the bell. Of course, some of you will make comments. That's fine. But let me know also what you think. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.